Hi, can everybody hear me? I'm sorry, my internet
Yes, you're audible.
is shaky today.
Ma'am, may I start?
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. So, good afternoon and greetings to one and all present here. On behalf of SEVA, Social Work Students Forum, Department of Social Work, aided Madras Christian College, I welcome you all to the second session of the Level 2 workshop, The Catharsis of Grief on Addressing Students in Dealing with Peers. I thank all the participants who has joined for today's session and our respected speaker. So, with no further ado, I hand over the session to Ms. Utkasha Jaga. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. How is everybody today? How have you been doing? Everyone good?
All
Great,
good.
great. After our yesterday's session, was there any sort of feeling that kind of came up? Anything that, um, any emotional heaviness that anybody felt here? None after the workshop. Great. Okay. So I'll start from where we left yesterday. Just give me 1 second, okay? Yeah. So while we were talking about grief yesterday, we spoke about, how different cultural context like highly impact the way we kind of see grief and the way we understand grief. Um, the last thing that we did talk about was the cultural context of grief, right? So we'll be continuing from there and understanding how to work with grief in a field setting. So, how many of you here would be working in the field as counselors, as social workers, working with people directly? Okay, that's one. Has anybody had field work experience here? Yeah, so like a bunch of you would be working directly with people, right? And any fieldwork experience prior to this? Okay. So when we talk about exploring the impacts of grief and loss, we also understand how losing. Okay, wait. Yeah, not exactly in relation to grief, but with people. That's okay. That's great. So when we get out on the field and when we work directly with people, we have to also understand that a lot of times, because of the heaviness that kind of comes with grief, the kind of emotion that grief is, and the weight that it holds in people's life, it can impact anybody, like a lot. Like in general, like the impact of grief can be very, very heavy. So it can range from, say, uh, dysfunctionality, uh, not being able to carry a routine for themselves, not being able to, just like continue the things that they did before the said loss. And a lot of times, what also happens with grief is that we not only grieve the loss of that particular relationship or particular person, particular place, but we also grieve the loss of our own version that was there. So, for example, if we're talking about, like a breakup, if you're grieving a breakup, you're not just grieving the loss of that person or the relationship. You probably are also grieving the version of yourself that that other person kind of brought out. Does that make sense? And like, yes, so thank you. And at the same point of time, this all happens with, like, yesterday somebody said that they had lost their pet, and this really happens when we kind of like talking about the losing of a pet, or when we're talking about losing a child. At that point of time, because there is this entirely different version of us that is like the caretaker, right, that takes care of the pet, or that takes care of the child, and that part really has no use anywhere else, because probably in our life that child or that pet is the only source where our caretaker energies are kind of used. When we lose that, we are left with that caretaker part feeling very, very abandoned. So, grief might bring in anger because there is a feeling of being abandoned. And a lot of time, people who are facing this grief might feel like they're being selfish, because they can be angry at the person for leaving, they can be angry at a tragedy for happening. But what we have to do is we have to tell them that it's completely okay to feel all of that. If they feel angry, even if somebody has passed away and they feel angry at the person for dying, even that's completely okay, because they feel abandoned. They feel like I made plans with my best friends for the next 10 years of my life, and my best friend left without me. And this can then spiral into that I should also leave, which is what we have to make sure that it doesn't happen, right? That's something that we have to work with in terms of A, making them feel like it's okay to feel angry, and that a sense of abandonment might be coming in. Explain to them why they feel abandoned and how it's completely okay to feel that. And second thing is, they don't do anything so drastic that they would want to, like, die, or they would want to end their life, because their life probably has now no meaning left without this person or this relationship or anything that they have lost. So, what we do when we work with people who are experiencing grief is we work on two things. We work on building their self again, and we work on building hope for them. Because hope and meaning is lost when you experience grief, right? Like, it could be one of, like, if you have known somebody in the recent past who has experienced like grief, or who has experienced a loss, you can notice that hope could just like disappear from their lives. Meaning can just disappear from their lives. As people who work with them, as counselors, as social workers, as therapists, what we do is we work on building that meaning. We work on developing meaning in terms of making them realize that, okay, all of this is valid, everything that you're feeling is valid, but also there is a life that you can live for, like, beyond this point also. Because at that point of time, life as they knew it ended, right? Like, if you envision your entire life with this one thing or this one relationship and it ends, your idea of life gets shattered. Which is why when we work in the field, we have to rebuild this idea of life and tell them that there exists a life beyond this person or this relationship. Does it make sense? Anybody has any questions, anything to add to this? Any experiences to share? Okay, I'll move ahead then to the next slide. Yeah, similarly, so when we talk about grief, loss, and mental health, which is okay, here's a video that I want you all to see. I hope it works though with the internet. Give me 1 second.
Psych2Go is a digital media organization that raises mental health awareness by presenting psychological topics in a digestible and relatable manner. Please your support to us as well. Most people know the common 5 to 7 stages of grief: shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. Everyone experiences these stages in entirely different ways. While you're grieving, many people will tell you something along the lines of, "Stay strong," or "It'll get better." While those are predictable and well-intentioned things to say in an attempt to comfort someone, they're not always true. When I was younger, I experienced more than my fair share of grief. And after years of reflection, I've come to understand that there is more to grieving than most people realize. I would like to share with you 5 things about grieving that I desperately wish someone would have shared with me. 1. We grieve for more than the dead. Yes, the death of a human being is the most common source of grief, but it's not the only one. You can experience the whole force of grief for anything important to you. You can grieve the loss of a pet. You can mourn the loss of a sentimental object, the loss of a beloved place, or of any kind of relationship or connection. Nothing has to die in order for you to go into mourning. There can be grief for a friendship that has just drifted apart, or for the ending of your favorite book series, a home that you've had to move away from. You can grieve for yourself. When you grow and change as a person, pieces can be left behind. Old bits of a personality and mannerisms that we can ache for all the same. Whenever something is lost, no matter what, no matter why, and it causes pain in its absence, that is grief. 2. Just stay strong typically goes hand in hand with the denial phase of grief. It's when you're told that despite all the terrible things happening to you, you must stay strong and overcome it. What is not said is that just stay strong should mean when you're done properly grieving, you will still be alive. This will not kill you. You are stronger than your tragedy. Instead of pretend like nothing's wrong, don't let your tragedy affect you. Just keep living regardless. Denial is usually said to be the first or second stage of grief. If you find yourself stuck there, you will never eventually get to acceptance, and you will never really be out of your cycle of grief. It's okay to not be strong. That's what people should tell you when you're beginning to grieve. It's all right to cry, to scream, to take time away. It's understandable to feel weak for a bit, so long as you learn to let that weakness go. You do not have to stay strong. If you do, moving on may become difficult. Weakness and vulnerability is part of the grieving process, and it should be accepted. 3. There should be a guilt phase of grief. Often when we lose something, those of us that are still here feel a sense of guilt. Some people feel left behind. Some feel survivor's guilt, in which they believe they should also be gone, or should have died in the other's place. Some simply regret what they missed out on before the end. They regret something they said or did, or the lack thereof. We find a way to place the blame on ourselves, find a way to make circumstances our fault, even when it's not. Facing death often precedes a reevaluation of life. It's only natural that we question things in our time of grief. It's normal to find regrets. You're always going to feel like you could have done something. You're not weird or unhealthy to feel a sense of guilt, but you need to learn to let it go eventually. There's nothing to gain from holding on to it. Instead, turn that guilt into nutriment for what is still alive. Learn from your regrets and use them as a guide to ensure that you live the life you have to the fullest. 4. Time means little to the act of grieving. It does not heal all wounds, but merely smooths them over, making it easier to forget their presence. It'll get better is nice, though not necessarily true. And that's okay. There are some things that'll never really go away. Some scars never fade, but that's a fact of life and part of you. It's normal to still be haunted by things that happened long ago, to still grieve years later. Do not be down on yourself for being emotionally caught up in the past sometimes. You can't just ignore trauma and tragedy and hope that it'll go away. Nothing fixes itself. To heal requires treatment, whether that be through outside assistance or internal reflection. Acceptance will not just roll around to you. You have to get there yourself. 5. Acceptance is more complicated than just admitting to a loss. Acceptance is not a finish line. There is no real finish line with grieving, because grief is not a marathon. Rather than a straight shot to the end, it's a winding and confusing maze. Nor is it a one and done thing. More than likely, you will find yourself going through the cycle of grief several times throughout your life, and chances are you will grieve the same thing more than once. You can regress, and that's perfectly okay. You could be done with grieving for years when suddenly something triggers you and you have to go through it all over again. This usually happens if you did not let yourself grieve properly the first time, but it can still happen to those that have had the proper closure. We're never really done with grieving. We will grieve for as long as we live. The cycle of grief goes hand in hand with the cycle of life, but that is nothing to be afraid of. In order to accept our losses, we must accept the cycle of grief for all that it is. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're grieving, we hope that you fully allow yourself to do so. Or maybe you know someone who's grieving. Share this video with them. As always, thanks for watching.
Everybody, how are you feeling? So, like that's the thing about grief that I was talking about in terms of how there is so much psychological impact, that's just like left behind once you have the loss, once you face the loss. Because it's a thing, right? So, like, that's a thing that because you have like an entire life to live with that experience, we weave it into our story. That grief becomes a part of our lives. It becomes something that kind of look at. It becomes something that we kind of like understand, and that's the important thing, right? Does anybody have anything to share, anything to about your own stories or your own narratives of grief?
Ma'am,
Yeah. Okay. Okay, yes,
um,
there's some.
okay, I don't want to share the exact incident or what
That's
happened,
okay. That's okay.
but um, when I was at my most down phase, the only thing
Hmm.
that made me feel like bad was that I wanted to be my old self. Like
Hmm.
I so wanted to be, I was like, my life was perfect. Why did this happen to me? And now that perfection is ruined.
Hmm.
So
Right.
I just wanted to go back in time that that thing should just not have happened in my life. And
Hmm.
I used to cry for that old me. So that is something that I really used to grieve about it. I want my old life kind of back, old myself back.
Hmm. And like
But
when you, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
yes, no, please.
No, I was saying, like when you kind of understand this and look at it in terms of, okay, you want your old self back, this can also happen because it can feel like we don't recognize ourselves with grief, right? We don't recognize ourselves after something as traumatic has happened. and it just feels like, okay, there is this other version of us that exists, and we want to go back to being that. But that's the thing about being human, right? That we are dynamic individuals. All of our lives are made up of beautiful dynamic stories, which kind of help us to become these empathetic people, which may helps us, become these sort of like um people who are compassionate, who can resonate with other people. And at the end of the day, humans are social beings, right? We are all social beings. We connect with other human beings on the basis of their stories. We share our stories, we feel understood, and that is how we bond. That is how we form friendships. That is how we form relationships. So, the one thing that grief teaches us is how life is going to be dynamic constantly, right? And it's that variability, that that thing about it being dynamic is something that helps us grow as human beings and not remain static. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, very true.
Right? And the next thing that, so does anybody have any idea about how different, in what different ways will uh grief will be experienced, like in adults and like in kids? Yeah, that's one thing that can happen. Social withdrawal, yes.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So after a particular loss, if there are certain things that I wanted before the loss,
Hmm.
okay. So once the loss happened, then I like those things that I've historically wanted, I
Hmm.
do not want them anymore.
Right.
And so the question that I have is it because of the loss that the shift has happened, or was it,
Hmm.
gonna happen anyway? Like I keep getting confused if it's because of the loss that
Hmm.
you have these core values or things that you want out of life, right? And the loss somehow has made me not want those things. So right
Right.
now I'm at a place where I'm confused if it's because of the loss that the shift has happened, or was it eventually gonna happen?
Right. So, like a lot of times, what might also happen is that you might want that thing contextually, right? Say, if you had wanted that thing with, if it's a person or if it's a relationship, it can be like, my worldview is dependent on that one thing being in my life. So, because of that, I might want different things. But when I experience that loss, it might also happen that my worldview changes. And if my worldview changes, my needs might change. The way I kind of perceive relationships, other relationships might change. The way I perceive even the idea of permanency and things being temporary might change, right? So say that for the longest, like if somebody is like, like yesterday, I think Charlene, you only wrote, right? That how changing places often is also like a sense of loss that you experience,
Yeah, that was me.
right? So a lot of times what might also come in with this is that there is a lack of sense of permanency that might just like come in, right? So like if I am to give example from my own practice, I have seen people who were kind of forced to relocate a lot or shift their houses a lot. They refuse to kind of make any place their permanent home because it feels like that will be taken away from them. Like even something as little as, okay, I don't want to add furniture to my room. I don't want to add photo frames to my room. I don't want this place to look like a home. Why? Because I'm scared that it might be taken away and my heart will be broken again. So I'd rather not do that. And this is how mental health gets impacted when we're talking about grief. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So, because of the loss that you experience, because of the loss that is there, the way you look at the world might also change. Okay, does that make sense for everybody? And this doesn't always have to be like negative, right? It can also be just like, as somebody who used to believe in permanency of things, now I am more prepared for things going away, which is technically hurtful, but the person might not always perceive it as something that's dysfunctional. They might say that it helps them. So, a lot of times, what we also need to know is that any sort of emotion, any sort of, thing that we experience also has like a protective function. So any coping mechanism, any defense, any walls that we put up, while it might look like, okay, it's impacting our relationships and it's impacting the way we interact with the world, rationally it might, but emotionally it is serving like a helpful thing. Like it is protecting you from being hurt. It is protecting you from being heartbroken. It is protecting you from, putting yourself out there only to be made fun of. So, emotionally, when we understand, it is coming from a protective place. It's coming from a place where it wants us to not be in the same position again that we were when we experienced that loss. While rationally, logically, technically, it can be dysfunctional because it impacts our relationships and the way we interact with the world. Does that make sense? Great. So, yeah, the next topic that we have is, another thing talking about how complicated or traumatic grief works. Does anyone has heard of this complicated or traumatic grief? Anybody has any idea?
Is it something to do with not understanding why you feel the guilt, but you still feel some sort of thing? Maybe it's the loss of someone else that triggers
That could
grief.
be one of the aspects of it. But traumatic grief is something that, we have experienced a lot during the second wave of COVID. So when we talk about traumatic grief, it is like a two-way thing. It's like trauma and grief kind of happening together, right? So imagine if somebody gets in a car accident. That's a trauma of getting in a car accident. But at the same time, they lose somebody else who was in the same car as them. They survive, but they see that person just like passing away in front of them. So the mind then kind of doesn't know if it has to grieve for the loss or it has to process the trauma that the person has underwent, right? So it's like two very kind of heavy responses, which is trauma and grief, kind of coming together, and us not being able to prioritize that, okay, should I process my trauma first or should I process my grief first? Both of these come at the same time and then somehow make us very, very dysfunctional. Does it make sense? So, it would be like with trauma, there can come, if anybody has experienced trauma, there can be symptoms of trauma such as hyperarousal, um, anxiety, signs of depression, low mood, affects their appetite, affects their behavior in general, like is in a space of, like whatever the signs of trauma are. So along with that, there will be signs of grief. So there might be constant feeling of loss. There might be constant feeling of meaninglessness. There will be constant feeling of loss of identity. And that person would not be able to kind of understand that, okay, do I deal with this sense of meaninglessness first, or do I deal with healing myself first from the trauma that I have experienced? So especially in therapy, when we kind of are faced with a situation where a person is facing traumatic grief, where they are kind of, not understanding what's going on, it is very important for us to know that what we kind of start working towards is building a sense of self, because that's lost in both trauma and grief, right? And then eventually work through acknowledging their loss, acknowledging what they have went through, helping them kind of rebuild a meaning of their life, and then empowering them so that they deal with their trauma. So we give them the space to grieve while empowering them so that they get to process their trauma. Does that make sense? And because both grief and trauma have neurological impacts, this is how we can, work with it. Like, this is how it impacts our nervous system, it impacts our different parts of the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala and the limbic system become extra active because they're the emotional centers of the brain. So what we do is shared in this small clip.
When we're grieving a profound loss, we often say we're heartbroken, but it might be more accurate to call it brain broken, given the role the brain plays in grief. As your brain adjusts to the loss of someone you love, you might feel numb, depressed, or foggy. But moving through the stages of grief is natural and healthy. It helps you process your loss and begin to move forward over time. This is Your Brain On, where we explore how the world affects our brains and ourselves. The experience of grief is twofold: the immediate acute pain of the loss, and the months afterward as you mourn. The loss of someone meaningful functions as a stressor, triggering the pituitary gland at the base of the brain to produce adrenocorticotrophin, or ACTH. ACTH sends a signal to the adrenal gland to release cortisone, a stress hormone. Unlike, say, a temporary threat, grief is an intense, persistent stressor, so your body remains flooded with cortisone. That can cause your immune system to falter, making you feel run down. This is likely why some bereaved spouses fall ill soon after their partner dies. Even if the death of your loved one was expected, the actual event can still feel like a shock to the system. In the short term, a traumatized brain is bottom-heavy, meaning primitive areas, including the fear center, are overactive, adding to feelings of stress and despair. Meanwhile, higher cortical areas of the brain are underactive, like the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps regulate emotion. You may find it difficult to let go of minor annoyances or experience symptoms like increased heart rate for several minutes after you're startled. However, over time, the initial shock of the loss typically gives way to a deep sadness or depression as you continue to mourn. Depression can cause widespread changes across several parts of the brain, including the amygdala, which regulates sleep behavior and mood, and the hippocampus, which processes memory and regulates stress hormones. These changes disrupt core functions of our bodies and minds. As you grieve, you may find yourself sleeping too little or too much, forgetting things, or trapped in a brain fog. These feelings are difficult, but the acute pain doesn't last forever. Eventually, the sadness begins to lift at least a little bit, and then you may move on to feelings of anger or guilt before slowly moving toward acceptance of the loss. Experts agree the bereaved follow their own individual timelines, but in general, this three-stage process usually takes about a year. There are steps you can take to feel better as you go through the grieving process. Talk therapy can be a major help. This might be group bereavement meetings or cognitive behavioral therapy, which can redirect negative thoughts. Aerobic exercise can improve mood, memory, and thought processing. Talking with friends about the person you lost can be a comfort too. Studies show long-term grief actually activates neurons in the reward centers of the brain. And recalling the time spent with those who have died reminds us that the memories still live on.
Like for every time anybody kind of comes up and says to you that, okay, mental health, all of it is in your head and it's nothing real, you can actually show this to them. There are studies that kind of talk about how your brain structure is rewired after you experience trauma. You see the world differently, you experience the world differently, you kind of perceive it and understand in different way. Does it make sense? Okay. So yesterday when we were talking, I also requested you all if you could bring, like, paper and colors that are, if you have any. Did anybody get them? Did everybody get them? Oh, great. I would ideally want everybody in this workshop. There are like 27, 26 people to participate in this activity. It will be a fun thing. It will be something that will help us understand our mental health and our own grief. If you want, you can share it with everybody else. If you want, you can tell us on chat about how you have understood this, and like we can go ahead from there. But okay, so what I want you to do is, I want you to take your sheet of paper and think about, like, take 1 minute, and I would ideally want everybody to kind of write on chat um, about if your grief, or in general grief, had a color, what color would it be? Black, dark blue, dark yellow, brown, pale green, blue, gray, red, green, yellow, dark brown, dark blue, dark blue. Okay. I feel like even my answer would have been something in the tones of blue, maybe like an indigo blue color. Dark blue, another person said dark blue. So now what I want you to do is take your piece of paper, right? And draw yourself on it. Okay, I will give you an example. I have a paper and a pen right here with me. So, like, if this is your paper, I want you to draw yourself. Like, this is a very amateur drawing, but can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay. So you draw yourself in the center of the paper. You can draw yourself, like I have drawn a stick figure because I don't know how else to do it. But if you want to draw like a proper figure, if you want to draw yourself, in whatever way you want, if you want to just like make a circle and that's you draw yourself and give yourself a color that you feel represents you. Okay. And now think of a time that you have experienced grief. Think of a time that you have kind of, dealt with grief in any way. And then draw grief around you in whatever way you experience grief. So, for example, if this is me, my color would be probably pink. Okay. So, I will draw like a pink colored me. And then my grief would be like half encompassed, right? So it could be like a cloud. My grief looked like a circle. So I'll draw like a circle here and would color it dark blue because this is how I felt like when I was grieving. Do you think everybody understands this? Do you think you can take out 5 minutes and do this? Any responses? Okay. I'll give you like 5 to 7 minutes. You draw this and then we'll get to the second part of this activity. Draw yourself and draw the grief, how you feel, how you felt like it was there in your life or it is there in your life. Cool? Take 5 minutes. It's 4:21. I will tell the next part of this activity at 4:20, 4:27. Is that okay with everybody? Cool. Is everybody done? Does anybody need more time? Okay. Would anybody like to share their drawing through camera, like by turning on your camera? Like, I would love to see your work if anybody is comfortable in sharing that. Very cool, Shivangi. Nice. Very cool, Shandi. Okay, anybody else? Or should I just like move on to the second part of the activity? Okay. The second part of the activity is basically it can get a little emotionally overwhelming, but since we have time, we'll be okay. Um, this is your grief like sitting here in front of you, right? Now imagine if you ever got a chance to talk to your grief, what would you say to it? You can thank it, you can be angry at it, you can thank it and be angry at it and yet forgive it. You can be neutral towards it. Anything that you want to say, you can take like 10 minutes, 15 minutes to kind of write a letter like you're writing a letter to an old friend, like who's there in your life, but you feel like it doesn't, like the friend doesn't add anything, right? Write a letter to a friend that you might be mad at, like a friend, you want to say a lot of things but you haven't been able to say that. Do you think all of you can do that? Can you write a letter to your grief and express whatever you have felt towards the grief in the past so many years in that one letter? It doesn't have to be a long, elaborative letter. It can be like a short note also, but something that captures how you have felt towards the grief and if you now forgive it or not, if you want to kind of, learn to live with it or not. Does it make sense? Can you all do that? Okay, great. And it will be a cathartic space for you. Obviously, that's the name of this workshop, which is why I kept this for the end of the workshop. So, is 10 minutes okay? Like 10 to 15 minutes. I'll check in with you at 4:40. Okay, and then we'll go ahead from there. Cool? Everybody okay with it? Great. Okay, go ahead. Write a letter to your grief. Is everybody done? Do you guys need more time? Add another 5 minutes, okay with everybody? Cool. Let's start at 4:45 then. Another 4 minutes. By then, everybody would be done. Is everybody done? Great. How are you feeling? Any sense of being emotionally overwhelmed? Anybody wants to share how they're feeling? Like, don't share what you've written. I know it could be very personal. But if you have written the letter, can you please share how you're feeling after this? Right. All of these emotions are very common to experience. That's okay if you're feeling restless, it's okay if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling numb. Know that it's coming from a place of compassion. Know that you care for yourself and your love that you have for your loss, that all of these emotions are coming up. Yeah, even that can happen, that you can feel like all of it might happen again. But what you need to remind yourself in this moment is the fact that no matter what happened, you made it to here. And that's what you need to be thankful to yourself for. You were resilient enough. And I know resilience can get tiring to be again and again resilient, but the fact that you kind of made it to here represents that you care for yourself enough. It is just, it shows that you have it in you to kind of look after yourself, care for yourself, love so much that you're able to grieve for that. And it's always good to love so much. That's such a nice thing that you have. Does that make sense? So give yourself a little like pat on the back and be proud of yourself for making it till here, no matter what the grief was. No, of course, even not feeling anything comes from a place of compassion because your emotions are trying to protect you from feeling overwhelmed. It means that they care for you enough that they don't want you to be overwhelmed in this point, which is why numbness can come in. Be non judgmental towards yourself, be compassionate towards yourself. Give yourself the empathy that you would give a friend. And you know how to give that. I will share a very, very cute small clip with you which talks about how do you help a grieving friend, and I want you to help yourselves like that. This is what you do. This is what you would do with like a friend. So you do this to yourself. Give me just 1 second. It's the wrong video.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them. Or, you know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off. Or, I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture? We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
Does it make sense to everybody? How are you feeling? That's the thing, right? With pain, you can't heal it if you take it away from yourself or you invalidate yourself. Even with a friend, with yourself, you need to. Is it okay? There's a question. Is it okay to retreat from normal productive life? Yeah, because you need to take care of yourself first. You can't pour from an empty jug. So it's okay to take your time to refill that jug. Give yourself time to get back there. Give yourself time to heal. Opportunities can come again, even if it feels like they won't. Because the world that we live in today makes us feel like we are on like a ticking time clock. That constantly everything is going away from you and you can't take out time for yourself. That's where mental health and self-care comes in. You have to take care of yourself and you're allowed to take out time for it. Makes sense? How is everybody feeling? Can we quickly take like 2 minutes and do the breathing exercise that we did yesterday? Keep your left hand on your chest, your right hand on your stomach, and take 5 deep breaths as I guide you. Okay? I'll count, you breathe in, I'll count, you breathe out. Cool? Is everybody up for doing that? Great. Okay. So let's start. Left hand on your chest, right hand on your stomach. Breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out 5, 6, 7, 8. Breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out 5, 6, 7, 8. Is there a sense of being grounded? Anybody has anything to say? How is everybody feeling right now? The workshop has ended, by the way. Thank you for being here with me today. I know it got a little heavy, but unless you acknowledge grief, you can't work with it, right? Is everybody okay to go? Can I get some sort of response? Great. All right. So I think my work here is done. Thank you for being here, everybody. And I wish everyone very good luck with anything that you decide to do in the future. Okay? Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a great audience. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Just have few words to conclude with. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, ma'am. It was indeed a great session with so much of inputs that grief is a lifelong process and that we need to evolve with time to tackle it. Especially the activity at the end made us to vent out and also and realize our own mental health status where we stand. So it is overwhelming at the same time, very effective indeed. So it is a great privilege to have you with us, ma'am. Thank you once again. And thank you to all the participants for actively participating. I request all the participants to kindly fill the feedback form provided in the chat box for certificates and kindly remain in the meet for the valedictory program which will commence shortly. Ma'am, I also request you to stay back for the valedictory program. It will be for around 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you.
All right. All right. I'll try. Okay. I might have to go. I might rejoin after 5-10 minutes if my session right after isn't there. And
Okay.
if anybody wants to contact me, is it okay if I leave like my contact details in the chat box?
Yes, ma'am, that would do. You can leave
Okay.
it in the chat box.
Yeah, I can leave my. This is my email if anybody wishes to reach out. And this is the Instagram handle. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for being a great audience. And I'll try to join back for the valedictory.
Sure, sure. Thank you,
Okay.
ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
I request all the others to stay in the meet. We are yet to have more participants and our faculty to join so that we can start with our valedictory program.
Hello, everyone. We will start the valedictory program in a few minutes. Thank you. A very good evening and a warm welcome to all the participants and speakers. We have reached the end of the 3-day, 3-level conference. I once again would like to thank the speakers for taking time off to address us on different aspects to handle grief, and I am confident that each of us have gained a deeper understanding on ways to handle individuals who are grieving. We shall now move on to the feedback session for each level. And for level 1, that was taken by Dr. E. Arvind Raj, for professionals and paraprofessionals, I like to call upon Mr. Gibson Paul of 2nd MSW Madras Christian College for his feedback.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. I'm really glad and for conducting this workshop. It was really good and useful to us. The session by Arvind sir was really useful, actually. So it was the beginning of the workshop, and sir was so calm, and he took us through the session. Since it's a very difficult and an important topic, sir was so calm and he guided us slowly. And I'm sure everyone who attended, should took the best out of that. And it was really a blessing. Thank you, sir. And the activity in the beginning, I must say, where sir asked us to close our eyes and get up out of our seats and just go around. We were able to connect with that process of grief. So how, sir, when you close your eyes and things suddenly got dark. We weren't able to just move around freely. And that is how when someone grieves, the tears and the pain makes life dark, and we need someone to guide us and support us, so we are able to connect with the process of grief and really understand how difficult and dark it might be when someone is going through a time of grief. And we need to reach out. They cannot handle it themselves. There needs to be some kind of support they need, and we very well understood through that activity. Thank you, sir, once again. And one thing that stays in my mind is the first point that sir put forward, that every loss is unique. We need to consider everything has its own effect. You cannot distinguish between small and big. You cannot compare with other losses. So that was one point, that every loss is unique and everything has its own effect. And sir also went on to mention different stages in grief and how we need to be very careful to handle grief. So I am sure many have been blessed, and we have learned a lot. So I personally believe we all will carry all that we have learned and reach out and stand by people who are handling grief. And I'm sure this session would help us. Thank you, sir, very much. The session was really wonderful. Thank you, sir, once again.
Thank you, Gibson. For level 2, that was taken by Dr. Kurian Jose for faculty and professors, I now request Dr. Caroline Victoria, faculty from the Department of Physics, to give her feedback. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sitara. Actually, the catharsis of grief and the level 2 was taken by Dr. Kurian Jose. And it was especially meant for teachers, because we are the people who are going to deal with the students who are going to come after. Definitely, everybody was undergoing a period of grief, somewhat or other, either financially or physically, whatever may be the case. We were undergoing some kind of a grief, and we are the people who are going to directly face the students. I think we should be equipped first to deal with our students, and of course our faculty too, our peers, our colleagues, because everybody had undergone, and especially in our department, another person, like our lab assistant, has also, we have lost him. So everybody was in a condition of equipping ourselves to carry on, to equip, to counsel others, as well as to get comfort from the grief which we have been undergoing. And during this second phase, especially after when our students come out, we have to equip. And in that way, this workshop helped us to see through some of the important aspects of grief counseling, both theoretically and through some exercises. And yesterday's workshop, we were a group of few teachers and students. It is a comfortable group of might be 12 to 14. After that ice-breaking session, we had some introduction on grief and various types of grief, and it was first he asked us to understand the regional way of expressing grief, and he gave some case study that was very useful. And the exercises was important for us to understand the different methodology of grief counseling. And in today's session, we were given more of theory behind, starting with the attachment theory, then manifestation of normal grief, and grief counseling. And he was expressing some of the physical sensation when one person undergoes grief, and cognitive conditions and behavioral patterns, which there is a change in the behavioral pattern, and the determinants of grief, and the tasks of mourning, and how grief sometimes goes wrong, and more importantly, the grief counseling. What are the various methodology we can adapt with our students so that they can overcome the grief, and we've given some evaluating result. And most importantly, there were good interaction. The speaker was making us to speak, and making us to relate to the topic he was speaking. So each and every time we were given a time of interaction where any of our doubts were cleared, and we had a good session. And of course, I should say, and there is an outcome of this workshop from these 2 days, I believe, because when I was asking about how to deal with the students, how we know that so many people are having a grief or such like that. He said, why we can't have a Google Doc or a Google Form sent to the students, making them some sincere effort, a genuine effort from them, so that we will know the assessment. We can know the intensity of grief anybody is undergoing, and we can have an assessment in detailed perform as such, so that we can have a document of our students who are all having some grief, and it can be done officially, and that is one suggestion. And we can have some online session for our students, especially for in terms of grief counseling. And when we meet physically, we can arrange some one-day workshop or training, or we can give them a stress management workshop or sessions or treatment like that for our students when they come. So I think the 2-day workshop was really helpful to me personally, and on behalf of our participants of level 2, I thank you, sir, especially the speaker, Dr. Kurian Jose, for your sincere effort to make us understand grief counseling, as well as the Department of Social Work to provide us such a platform to express or to equip ourselves in grief counseling. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable feedback. For level 3 that was taken by Ms. Utkarsha Jaga, for the students, I'd like to call upon Mr. Hudson Albo of 2nd MSW of MCC College to give his feedback.
Thank you, Satara. So the level 3 of this Catharsis of Grief workshop taken by Ms. Utkarsha Jaga was very insightful and very eye-opening. All the exercises and everything that she taught us has really been very helpful. Very, what to say? I do not have the words to express it properly, but it definitely brought some emotions that we all had to process. One completely revolutionary thought was when this exercise, she told us to process our grief and just tell what you felt. I was expecting all the answers to be just sad, like everyone's just sad, but no, everyone gave different answers to that. So that made me and I hope everyone to realize that everyone processes grief in a completely different manner, and how to acknowledge it. Now, if I have to talk to my friend, I will know. I cannot be there like all, oh, it'll get better, or you know, things will turn around. But I have to acknowledge it and be with the person. And to really highlight everything on the day 2, towards the end, ma'am showed us a clip, a small photo of how grief works. It never shrinks. It doesn't shrink throughout our life, but we actually become so better. We reinforce, we become stronger, that the grief is subsided in some manner. It never goes away. It's just we grow stronger. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Hudson. For the keynote address, we have Ms. Jemima Wesley Williams. Ma'am brings a deep awareness and commitment to the field of mental health. She is a licensed professional counselor accredited by the National Board of Certified Counselors, USA. Moreover, she is trained in trauma-informed psychotherapy, grief counseling, and play therapy. Ma'am is currently working at Madras Christian College as a student counselor. Over to you, ma'am, for the keynote address.
Thank you, Sutara. I thank you everyone for this opportunity, and especially I want to extend my thanks to the speakers, especially Dr. Arvind Raj. Sir, your session was amazing, and I attended your session. It was very helpful, and thank you for that informative session, sir, and also other speakers who have joined from Student Counseling Services of Madras Christian College. I extend my thanks and sincere thanks to you all. Now I take this opportunity to, just kind of summing up, because all these 3 days been hearing a lot about grief, the theories, the theoretical partner model, really such an informative, and it really educated us a lot. And definitely as students who have joined this, I'm really happy for this group, because there are a lot of students who have joined, where I believe like friends helping friends is very powerful. Peer support is amazing, more than, elders or teachers or, counselors supporting. When friends could support, the healing is, we don't know. That's very powerful, very powerful. So I'm really appreciating this group for your interest and for joining this. So I just wanted to add on, I cannot say just adding on, but I just want to emphasize on 2 important points about grief. Definitely, you all heard a lot about grief, the definition, I don't have to talk, but, definitely this COVID-19, me being in this counseling field and now attending to the calls, I've been recently attending from the month of May. I attended a lot of calls from public and also from our own students and faculty. One thing I felt that was so different from actual grief counseling that we used to do earlier is that here we were not given time to mourn in our own tradition. We were not given time to even process things. And another important thing that I found, which kept people from coming out of grief, is that the triggering factor is all around. Everyone, anytime you talk, they talk about COVID. You turn on television, it's about COVID. And there is something coming up, that is third wave is coming up. Every time they talk, there is COVID, all, left, right, center, it is about COVID and how they lost. And everyone we meet, we talk about that. So that trigger, somewhere it kept them in a place where to even come out of it was little difficult. So these are few things that I saw that current people who lost their loved ones, lost for that matter job or anything is going through right now, the difficulty that they are going through. And moreover, they were not let to say goodbye. There were cases where mother is in ICU and dad passes away, and they were to say, they didn't even inform the mother about the loss of the father because she's already in the ICU. So that kind of thing where they were not able to say goodbye to the loved ones, made it all the more difficult. So we all know, as beautifully our last speaker said, it's a traumatic grief, both mingled. We don't know whether I'm grieving or I'm traumatized, that kind of feeling, both together. So I just wanted to give just two thoughts to you as listeners. Maybe you would have handled grief, or maybe you'll be helping others who is in grieving process. One thing that I want to emphasize, which already speakers have emphasized, is sacred silence. Sometimes if you don't know what to say, how to help people out, when you're stuck, you don't have to worry. Just be there. There is sacredness in silence and being there. In Jewish culture, I just want to bring in the one thing called sitting Shiva in Jewish culture. So there is a mourning system in Jewish culture where loved ones, the close relatives and loved ones, they come, they sit. They just sit with the people who are mourning, and they just sit. And they say, after 1 or 2 days, they do talk about the goodness of the person, or sometimes they just sit there. We call that culture as sitting Shiva, where they don't talk much. There's no kind of word kind of thing to console people. Because, while handling grief, even if you offer tissue paper, when they are crying, when they're tearing up, if you offer tissue paper, that may also hurt them. Because somewhere it indicates, stop crying. We don't know, because people are so delicate at this point, so vulnerable, so broken. Anything from you can, we don't know. So this is a very sensitive area when you're handling grief, when you're handling people who are going through loss. So one good thing that you can always use, as you're helping people, is the sacredness of silence. We call it a sacred silence. Just be with them. Just your presence, it helps. Okay, so I just want to offer this as a tip with you as you help people. And another important thing that I want to give to you as in the place of helping professional is the hope of post-traumatic growth. Okay? Always have this in you, because it is always said that hope cannot be manufactured, but it can be borrowed from hope-filled people. As you be there with people who's going through loss, when they are processing the grief, be with them as an hope-filled people. Okay, you don't have to give them hope-filled words. You don't have to be, don't have to say anything, but stay with the hope that there is always a hope of post-traumatic growth. It may certainly take time. There is no something called, 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Definitely it depends. You all would have heard about it, how it is so personal, so subjective. People take and process things in their own way. But definitely there is a growth out of trauma. So as people, as friends, as teachers, when we step out to help people, let us be filled with this hope that there is a growth after this traumatic grief. People do make meaning differently. People rebuild their life in a very different way. There's so many things that we can talk about post-traumatic growth, where beautiful things come out of broken things. Yes, right now you're broken, but let us be filled with the hope that out of this brokenness there's going to come that something that is so beautiful, something which they themselves wouldn't have comprehended. Okay, there is always this hope of growth and beauty out of this ashes as they're going through this. So as they're trading through this valley of tears, they'll come out with joy and with hope. Okay, but all that as helping professionals, as friends and as staff, sometimes our presence matters so much. I'm not saying that this is all about it. Definitely you have heard all the details of theories and other things. Just these 2 points I just wanted to emphasize here, because your presence and your hope, how much hope filled you are. Because sometimes as helping professionals, we get burnt out, we get doomed. Our hopelessness can impact people. So at this juncture, I just want to give you, be hope filled. There is always post-traumatic growth. There is always beauty, which may emerge out of it. But all that you need, is to just facilitate this process, walk alongside with them. There is the tunnel that they're walking through. Just handhold them, walk with them. And when they come out, they'll definitely come out with hope. Okay, so with these words, I really thank social work department for giving me this opportunity. And I also wanted to extend student counseling services at this point. I've given details about student counseling services, the email ID, phone number. Please do share with your friends if you feel that they need grief counseling, and specifically if they are grieving and you feel like they may need, if I would recommend you to help them to the first level, but if you feel that they need professional help, please do refer them to student counseling services. And moreover, last point, seeking help is a sign of maturity. Don't ever think seeking help is a kind of weakness or you becoming vulnerable. Please do inform your friends also. Seeking help is a sign of maturity. Not everyone can handle things. We need someone as we tread upon emotional crisis. We all have seasons in life, where we need each other. Okay, so this time of difficult season, please do let your friends, give your hands, and also let them know that sharing and reaching out for help is a sign of maturity. It is not being weakness. Okay, so with these words, thank you once again for this opportunity. Thank you, Sitara. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the pro tip of that there is sacredness in silence and that there's always beauty from ashes. Thank you, ma'am, for those words. Last but not the least, I request Ms. Derlin Cinderella, General Secretary of SEVA, a Social Work Students Forum, Madras Christian College, to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Sitara. As we come to the end of the third level workshop on the catharsis of grief, a workshop on handling grief, I feel very honored and privileged to render the vote of thanks for the day. On behalf of SEVA, Social Work Students Forum, Department of Social Work, aided Madras Christian College, I once again extend my gratitude to our speakers of all three levels, right from Dr. E. Aravind Raj, who addressed professionals and paraprofessionals, Dr. Kurian Jose, who addressed faculty from our college, and Ms. Utkasha Jaga, who addressed students. Thank you, speakers, for the informative sessions. I would also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the Principal and Secretary, Dr. P. Wilson, for helping us to conduct the workshop successfully, our Head of the Department, Dr. Miriam Samuel, for her support and guidance, our Staff Advisor, Dr. Sudarshan, Dr. Prince Anadurai, and also Mr. Nainan John for their prayers and support. We also thank Ms. Jemima Wesley, our Student Counselor, for extending her support. Most importantly, we thank our workshop coordinator, Dr. Prince Solomon, for motivating, encouraging, and supporting us in all means to conduct this workshop in a successful manner. I thank all our committee members, convener Mr. Tony, and my fellow cabinet members for their tireless efforts. Also, huge thanks to the active audience for your active participation throughout all three levels of the workshop. Above all, I would like to thank the Almighty for enduring His blessings throughout the workshop. Thank you and have a great day.
Everyone, I would like to kindly request all of you to turn on your cameras for a group photo. Thank you all.
Thank you.